We are back with Antjuan and Emily, and we're going to talk about South Carolina, something near and dear to Antjuan's heart.
He's got the pin on and everything.
Antjuan, there's a fairy stump. Explain, okay, what is this? What's this event? Why is it important? And then, of course, you got to give the standard why South Carolina is the most important state in this primary.
Sure. So Gallows Fair is a political gathering that goes back for a very long time. Way before Antjuan Seawright was even a thought. But it's a place where people come, just in South Carolina, Democrats, to gather and make their stump speech to the voters. It's in the PD.
Okay.
For you coastal people, it's like going
Listen,
towards...
I went to Clemson. Thank you very much, okay?
But no, it's on the way to Myrtle Beach. It has become the thing over my political lifetime and even before my political lifetime. It's the best place on the campaign trail to get chicken bogs. The biggest attraction, I think, for this year's event will obviously be Joe Biden. He is dominating South Carolina, dominating African Americans, and he was one of the first ones to be confirmed for this event. The unique thing about this audience is that you have a lot of retirees who make their way to Myrtle Beach who live. And so this will be a lot of Rust Belt voters who now live in South Carolina who will make their way, who live in that area. And you have the PD, which is a predominantly African American portion of the state, who they will be a meeting point between those two group of voters.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that we've seen, Emily, is that we have Cory Booker and Kamala Harris who have tried time and time again to knock Joe Biden and his support amongst African American voters. It's arguably backfired. If many of the cases, his support went up in places out South Carolina, and you cannot be the Democratic nominee if you don't dominate amongst black voters. That's what saved Hillary Clinton.
Win South Carolina.
And if you don't win South Carolina, it's true.
Well, isn't it interesting how the media narrative didn't reflect that at all?
Didn't
right?
at
Like
all.
after Kamala had her big moment in that debate, it was not talked about in that context.
Well, that's just how white liberals think about race,
well,
not how actually people of color think about race.
But that is such a big problem in how we're having a conversation about this election. This makes it so hard for people to understand what's actually happening in the ground in places like South Carolina.
Well, it's what I keep saying. There's a big disconnect between the Twitter bubble, the coastal elites, and the media's narrative about the Democratic presidential primary. And that was true for the Republican primary as well. I mean, arguably that there was a sense that Donald Trump was not going to be successful in the media, in the bubble, and voila, this guy just came out of nowhere.
Well, a lot of people on the ground were like, this guy Trump is going to
Right. I mean, I want to hear from Antjuan, because I think this is one of the most essential questions of this primary. Like, what do you think could theoretically move black voters off of Biden? Because I don't think it's, busing views 30 years ago or anything. But I do think if there was a real fear about electability, which is why this last debate was important for him to come out stronger and show he was the guy who could go toe-to-toe with Trump potentially, I think that could potentially be the thing. But what do you think? I
don't see this idea that Biden is not electable is not true based on what we've seen from the polls. That's number one. Number two, I think one thing that could change the narrative is what we saw in 2008. And I'm a big advocate for not comparing races, but I think if non-African American voters, like in places like Iowa, validate Kamala or Cory as African American candidates, as they did with Barack Obama, that could serve as a game changer for the race. Because you remember, I worked for Hillary in 2008 too. We were up 20 points right before the South Carolina primary, and then Barack won Iowa, and then it was just
people said, "Oh, this could be real.
This could be real."
He was validated in a space where African American participation is. You wouldn't look to that place to be high turnout, and voila, it changed the game.
This, I think, Emily, gets to a very fundamental thing about how voters think about politics, which is maybe even a lot of them say in these polls they don't even necessarily agree with Biden on everything. They view him as the most electable, and more than anything, it's a trust factor. In 2016, the Republican base lost its trust in the Republican establishment and went towards Donald Trump. What I find interesting here is that the Democratic electorate has not lost that trust, and instead it seems to be coalescing around Joe Biden. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think partially is the juxtaposition with Donald Trump. It's partially the juxtaposition with something the Democratic electorate sees as an unsuccessful or a failed anti-establishment president, right? So you can look for Bernie, and maybe your thirst or hunger for someone like Bernie, who's not exactly in the same the same vein as like the host of The Celebrity Apprentice, but you can want someone to shake things up and mix things up when it's juxtaposed with what's perceived as the instability as the Trump presidency. Then you can understand why there would be more of an appetite for a stable candidate.
Right.
But I think we should also inject in here to the fact that, you know, Biden in this Reuters poll was at 22%.
Yeah, it was 22%.
I mean, it's not like he's like a dominant front runner, and in that particular poll, he's statistically tied with Bernie.
That's the point I was going to make. Look, every day I think about 2008. The fact of the matter is, as I said earlier, Hillary was a dominant force in the race very on, and then things could change. Anything can change in this environment. The weather can change pretty quickly, the political weather in this environment. So this team cannot afford to take anything for granted. But I think the more Donald Trump behaves the way he does, the more rhetoric he uses, the more attacks he launches on Joe Biden, the more other presidential primary candidates in the Democratic primary attack him, that translates to everyday voters. There's something about Joe Biden, if all these people are going after him, that we really have to pay attention to. And while a lot of people talk about electability, I talk about connectivity. And I think Biden has demonstrated over the years that he is connected to audience all across the Democratic platform.
Yeah.
Why don't you think that people have responded more to Cory Booker? Because he is one where both debates, I think anyone would say he performed capably.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, he's
charismatic.
He's very charismatic.
He's got a lot of money.
He's incredibly talented. He's, you know, when you do talk to people on the ground, they say his organization in Iowa, in particular, and you can speak to South Carolina, is incredible. Like, he's got one of the most effective sort of campaigns working on the ground, and yet nothing.
Well, I think just because people like you don't mean they politically love you.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of candidates who are liked in the Democratic and Republican primary, but liking and loving is different, just like dating and marriage is different. There are a lot of people who may want to politically date
They want to date Cory.
but they may not want to marry him politically. And I don't think that's anything necessarily about Cory.
Yeah.
I think it's just the times we're living in. These are very serious times for certain communities, particularly those that look like mine. And people just want to feel like they have a stabilizing voice and a force who are going to trample down for them. And I think they just see that in Joe Biden. And for some, Whip Clyburn has made this point time and time again, people see Cory Booker and Barack Obama as one and the same. And for some, I think he's running in the shadows of Barack Obama.
That's interesting.
And that's been the commentary I've heard from my leader, Whip Clyburn.
What do you think, Emily?
I think there's an authenticity problem with Cory Booker, and I think he performs well in debates, but I don't think people necessarily buy what he's selling because it's so performative.
It is.
So, it's
Spartacus.
Like, it's like high school theater.
It's Spartacus.
It feels. I mean, it feels a little bit like it's 8 years too late. Like the politics, what's valued in politics today is a little bit different. That currency of authenticity is so important. And I think Sagar also makes the right point, which is that, look, if you're looking for a Bernie type candidate, you've got Bernie. If you're looking for a more centrist, sort of like, let's stay with what we know candidate, you got Biden.
Yeah, if you miss Obama,
else,
what's better than
Obama's
vice president?
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
And I think that matters. And the truth of the matter is you have the opportunity to elect the first African-American female as a Democratic nominee. You can't discount what Kamala Harris brings to the table. And you also can't discount the fact that you have Bernie, who's ran before, who had a solid coalition of African-American voters, wasn't strong enough to be Hillary, but he had a solid coalition. And you have Elizabeth Warren, who is pulling arguably from everyone in this race who's put together a unique coalition to bring her to its years. And so there's so many factors, there's so many things that I think dictate the current mood and temperature of this primary. But again, it's still early. There's a lot of ball left to be played, and a lot of people have not been paying attention to this point.
Well, thank you so much to you both. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tomorrow on Rising, journalist Ryan Grimm will discuss all the latest in politics.
And of course, they're going to throw the news of the day to Team Rising and see what they think. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Hill TV Live. And of course, subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. Make sure you click the bell so you get those notifications so you don't miss a word of the brilliant things that my co-host says every day. And I add what I can. Everybody have a great day.
See you later.